All men are short of money, especially the rich ones. That, my friend, is capitalism. A.J. West.
Hello and welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing what does it mean to be truly rich or wealthy? This is a harder question than you'd think, and I'm going to take this perspective from solely an economic point of view in terms of physical wealth, because there are other ways you can be wealthy. You could be spiritually sound. You can have a big, happy, loving family. But that's more analyzing theology and philosophy with Nick. With in terms of analyzing finance with Nick, we'll stick with the material world on this. And the most common definitions that I've heard kind of come into three main categories. One, a combination is that you make a certain multiple more than the person you're asking. Like, I've heard this a lot. So, like, what is rich and mean to you? If somebody makes $100,000 a year, say, oh, somebody makes $300,000 a year is rich. Or somebody makes $50,000 a year, say, so if somebody makes $150K a year is rich. That's just very subjective and more just highlighting your frustrations with your own income. So it's not really an accurate measurement. The second one is like some flat amount of money that just sounds like a lot. Like, oh, $1 million in the bank, $5 million in the bank, $1 billion in the bank. Whereas some of these numbers are either unrealistically low or unrealistically high for the definition of rich. $1 million in the bank sounds like a lot of money, but most houses in the city I live in sell for multiples of that. And in most gateway cities in America, you're going to get at most a decent sized house. They're not going to get a mansion for $1 million today. And it's probably similar in other developed nations. So that number is probably too low. A number that is too high is $1 billion. You don't really need $1 billion to be rich. And I'll do the math on this to show you. You can live a very lavish and comfortable life and without working on a far lower amount. So if it's not just like those, what is the real definition of being rich? Well, the way that I would define being truly rich versus just high income, like high income is great. A high income person is better off than a lower income person financially speaking. But if you make $500,000 a year and you spend $501,000 a year, you're racking up debt. You're no better off than somebody who's breaking even at a much lower paying job. You may have a more fancy lifestyle in the short term, but if there's not a radical cut to your spending, you're going to have the same kind of problems as people in poverty in the long run. So high income alone is not a definition for this. In fact, really, I don't really think one can be working and be rich. Because the whole truly being wealthy and true financial freedom means that you do not need any sort of employment, whether it's your own business or a job or whatever type of arrangement you have, to survive. If you're truly wealthy, you can live off of your assets. And you can live off your assets without your assets going down year over year. It's in a perpetual way. Like if you say have saved, I don't know, $1 million in the bank, and you want to live a lifestyle that costs $200,000 a year, even if you get 10% return on investment, you're going to run out of money within 10 years. That's not rich, because if you're alive 10 years from now, you either have to go back to work or you're going to face abject poverty. So with those options narrowed down, really the definition of rich is that one of the key components of it is that you have enough assets that with a modest return, you will be able to live perpetually off those assets without having to contribute to them through income from labor. That would be a key part of the definition. But that really is not enough. Like, first of all, if your assumption for a reasonable rate of return is 20% a year, that's not realistic because even the best hedge funds in the world and Berkshire Hathaway find that challenging to do. So some individual on his own or her own is going to have a hard time doing that realistically. So if your ability to live off your assets requires an unrealistic high rate of return, that narrows it down. And also, the other key component is the lifestyle that you can afford based on living off your assets. It's in theory, somebody could retire on as low as, say, $1 to $2 million. If you have $1 million and you get 5% a year, then that's $50,000 a year that you can take out. And this is assuming inflation is zero to make this easy, logically consistent. If you have higher rates of inflation, then you're going to have to add inflation to the required rate of return. And so let's just say for this example, it's you're zero inflation, you have 5% real return. That's $50,000 a year. $50,000 a year after, say, you're paying 25% of that in tax, you're effectively having a little bit over $3,000 a month. That is not really, I would say, a rich lifestyle. Even if, in theory, you perpetually can get that $50,000 every year without drawing down on your balance and the purchasing power of it doesn't go down. Living in today's world on $3,000 a month, it can be done, especially in lower cost of living cities, but I would not consider that person rich, even though they don't have to work. Instead of having to work, they are forcing themselves to live a fairly modest lifestyle. This is the whole argument against the FIRE movement that I have, which is FIRE, if you don't familiar with it, stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early, where people work at relatively high paid corporate professions and live very frugally to have after-tax saving rates of 50 to 75%. They're able to rack up maybe $1 or $2 million doing it this way, and then they move to a cheaper place, spend some of that money on buying a property, and then live very modestly on the remainder of it, which I think the recent inflation bout the last 2 years has, I think, kind of derailed a lot of FIRE strategies, because I don't think FIRE can survive a bear market or a sustainable move in inflation. And you have to live miserly your entire life. Like, any potential splurge, such as like a random vacation to Europe, staying at like nice resorts, would basically tank your FIRE strategy potentially, unless if you're in a very high income level and are able to figure out how to save a lot more money than I think the typical FIRE professional does. So, off of my criticism of FIRE, I don't really think people who are living the FIRE life, even if it somehow works, like the example I mentioned, they're not rich. So, it narrows down my definition of rich. Somebody who can live not an unlimited lifestyle, because one of the flaws of economics is that people have unlimited wants and there's a limited supply of things in the world, and there's a finite amount of money you have to spend. Like, even Elon Musk would go broke if every day he bought a fighter jet, or every day he bought 20 new rocket ships that cost $200 million each. Like, so maybe he wants thousands of rocket ships. Maybe he wants to hire a private army to march around and pay all the salaries of those people. In theory, even if you have $100 billion, you'll eventually run out of money. So we have to have a definition of live a lifestyle that really you don't have to worry about expenses and live a very luxurious lifestyle, like upper middle class, or actually upper class life, typical upper class lifestyle stereotypically, without having to be concerned about money, A, and B, you're not concerned about money because you can live that lifestyle without drawing down on your capital. You can live solely off the returns of that lifestyle. And I'm just going to use this as a benchmark. This could vary depending on where you live in the world. Places with lower cost of living, this number can be slightly lower, or places that have lower taxes. Like, probably the cheapest place to be rich would be a place like the Cayman Islands if you're not an American citizen, because they have effectively zero, or Dubai, because they have zero income tax. Whereas the most expensive places to be rich would be a lot of places in Western Europe, which have very high taxes, and taxes particularly target business owners and owners of capital at higher rates than the general working public. That's probably the most expensive place to be rich. So it really, a lot of this depends on geography, but using like the United States example, I really think that the minimum amount of money you would need to have to be considered truly rich would be about $20 million in liquid net worth. Or if you want to have, assuming you have a nice house that's fully paid off, you can lower that to say $16 million, because in theory, 25% of your budget is on housing related costs like mortgage, property taxes, maintenance, utility bills, etc. And with most of that being the cost of the property itself. However, I'd really only cut the requirement by 20%, not by 25%, because people still have to pay property taxes every year, even if you own the house free and clear. And there will always be maintenance costs, even if you own the house free and clear. So you don't get a full discount of the value of that house. Like, just say hypothetically, a $5 million level house. So it would be $16 million if your house is free and clear. $20 million if your house is not free or clear is probably the minimum. That number, I would say, is really what defines somebody as rich. And how did I come up with that? Well, I did a calculation. It's $1 million gross. So before tax, and pre-tax income would be 5%. So you get a 5% return on your assets on $20 million. That's $1 million, and that's your pre-tax income you have every year without touching your principal. If I wanted to, and you can live $500,000 after taxes, you can live a very affluent lifestyle. That'll allow you to travel basically wherever you want, allow you to spoil your kids and grandkids. You can drive a nice car. You can have season tickets to your favorite sports team. Like, you won't be able to afford to buy the sports team, but you can still live a very good life on that. Like, better than the 99.9% of people in developed countries and not really have a care in the world. And that also gives you a lot of room to donate to charities and do a lot of other things too. If we wanted just to see more conservative, you wanted $1 million after taxes, like, which depending on where you live, again, the Cayman Islands, it's the same number. But if you live in, say, California, where your federal and state income tax combined is about 50%, then you need to double that number to 36 to 40 million as the minimum amount of net worth that you would need to be considered to be truly rich. And that's probably, I'd say, so depending again on geography and whether you 500,000 after tax or 1 million after tax is enough, and you might even need to put in an inflation kicker. But I would say $1 million after tax, even with an inflation, unless if we have like double-digit inflation for a decade consistently, that might change mine. But assuming we have the historical average of inflation post World War II, which is about 3.5%, and you can get a nominal return of 5 to 6% and a real return of, I don't know, 2 to 4%, then you will be fine, and you will be considered to be comfortably wealthy at the above the range of 16 million on the low end to 40 million on the high end. And that's why, like, honestly, like, if I have people ask me, like, what's your walkaway number? That's how I used to put my walkaway number at about 20 million back when I was in college, because I did that math. But the price level has gone up a little bit since then, so I'd probably put it now closer to 40 to 50 million that I would retire from working at that point. Or maybe not entirely retire, but I would heavily scale down what I'm doing, because that's the number you're truly wealthy and free. Anything less than that, you either have to compromise on the lifestyle you'd want to live, or you need to still work. And yeah, also the other key component is whether you want to have a family or not. If you're a single person who never plans on getting married or having children, cut all the numbers that I told you by 50 to 70%. Because a lot of the expenses involved with a lot of this stuff is raising a family. You don't need nearly as big of a house. You can live in a small apartment if it's just yourself. You don't have to pay for children's education. You don't have to pay for their just basic cost of living or family reunions. Traveling's a lot less because it's just yourself versus taking a family with you. So a lot of my assumptions are also built on my viewers either having a family of their own or wanting one day. But if that doesn't apply to you, like, you can live a very comfortable, affluent retirement on like that and live like a 0.1%, or maybe, and depending on where you live, it's probably as low as $5 million. Realistically, I would probably say the bogey is more like 10, but that's still a fraction of what it would take if you had family considerations. And so, yeah, a lot of people who claim to be wealthy and rich on social media and other places do not have net worths at this level. They may have high incomes in the short term, and if they invest it properly, they could get to that level, or if they can keep up their momentum. But yeah, and like, the thing is, the definition of ultra high net worth is somebody with about more than $20 million. And in the United States, there's approximately, and correct me if I'm wrong, about 250 to 300,000 people who qualify by that definition. And 300,000 out of 330 million people, just to generous estimates, that is less than 0.01%. So it's about 1 out of every 1,000 Americans, a little less, maybe 1 out of every 1,200 Americans qualify as being truly rich. Which, I mean, in theory, that sounds like it's very difficult, but if you live in a town, like a suburb that has, I don't know, 50,000 people in it, or a small town, that means that you have at least 40 people in your town who are high net worth, ultra high net worth individuals. So it's probably more doable than you'd think. With 1,200 subscribers, at least one of my subscribers, just statistically, is an ultra high net worth individual. Maybe more, given the topic of my channel is finance, which investments is a very big concern for these type of people. I'm trying to just be as inspirational as that. Look, it's attainable. You're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to do something that provides enough value to society to get there. But if you live in a country like the United States or a lot of developed world where there's enough economic freedom to pursue this type of goal, go for it. So now you have the benchmark of what it means to be truly rich.